Okay, we need to talk about Powers of X, because this series so far has been insane, and by the end of this video I have a lot of thoughts on where I think things are going from here, but suffice to say, I am very excited about this whole thing. In the past, Charles Xavier is approached at the fair by a woman. Her name is Moira Mataggart, and she has a message for him. It's not a dream, if it's real. Charles reads her mind and understands, and in this critical, essential moment, the history of the X-Men and the mutant race changes forever. In the future, in spite of the valiant efforts of the X-Men, a woman is captured to be used by a sinister machine named Nimrod. Farther still in the future, the woman's body has finally begun to decay as part of now completed archives that encompass the entire planet. They are watched over by a being called the Librarian, and Nimrod apologizes to this being, saying he wasn't built to maintain his integrity for a millennia. The Librarian claims it was nobody's fault. Nimrod was built for a war, and nobody could have seen how pointless that war would have been, or the surprising conclusion of the Human-Machine Mutant War. Nimrod states it is glad it doesn't have to contend with humans anymore, but the Librarian isn't so convinced. They look over a preserve, the last refuge of humans kept in a habitat representing their original environment. For they must remember what they overcame, something to point at, and pray never has dominion over this world again. Hey everyone, if you like Comic Island, be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out our Patreon page in the video description below. Alright, so Marvel did not lie when they said this event is going to change the X-Men forever. If you haven't read the first few issues so far, I highly recommend you check them out. As of this recording, so far there are 2 issues of both House of X and Powers of X out at the moment, and every little bit of them are as game-changing as everyone out of the X-Men office has been saying they would be for months. I admit, I was a little skeptical, and to be fair, it's not like the big 2 haven't been dishonest in their marketing before. But this time, they were not playing around. These X-Men comics are energetic, exciting, and promise a new direction for the X-Men that, if played right, could literally be explored for the next few decades, or longer. I'm hooked. The energy and the dynamics going on between these characters here, the growing discomfort felt by the human race as the X-Men roll out all these new changes, what we learn of the roots of all this in the past, the potential effects of it in the future, and it paints a complete picture of why things are suddenly so different, why it isn't just a cheap reboot, and why things with the X-Men should never be the same again. It feels like an incredibly clever way to completely recontextualize the entire history of the X-Men. A very grim cycle of war and conflicts that mutants, humans, and machines still haven't escaped. And so many of the timelines and alternate universes we've seen before in other comics are basically recast as these failed renditions of this cycle, each one leading to a change in the timeline that is now felt today. It could all be bogged down by filler or nonsense, and a worse writer would have flubbed this horribly. But if you read the comics in the order presented, it's pretty clear to me what's going on. There's a mountain of details only X-Men fans will get, but the core of the story is there, and it offers a ripe new chapter for the mutants I'm just so excited to see. Jonathan Hickman has done a lot of work for Marvel before, but I have to say it doesn't quite feel like he's ever done anything quite like this. This feels more like borderline Chris Claremont level of writing and world building for the X-Men, and if it all pays off, we've got a whole wild set of adventures for us in the future. I was thoroughly impressed by Powers of X #1, and this whole little crossover event in general so far. R.B. Silva, Adriano Di Benedetto, and Marte Garcia all bring us a lively comic with so much character and color to it. The detail is staggering, with such a great glimpse of various futures and possible new characters and directions for the X-Men to go in. This new generation of X-Men, for example, shows some really good potential. And it's all good, clean, wonderful X-Men fun. I'm still not sure I fully grasp the scope of what they're going for here. That is to say, I'm not sure how big this story really is trying to be. Charles and Moira appeared to have done a major change to the mutant race in an attempt to save them from inevitable war and chaos. Yet this first issue of Powers of X seems to imply that's exactly what happens anyways. And some of the details of these two series so far either hint at future content for the rest of this event, or possibly things that are going to be built on for several years. And then the stuff that we are talking about here just sound nutty and really different and interesting. There's mutant breeding pits on Mars, the Shi'ar partnering with the mutants to annex the Sol system, and the human race ultimately failing after leading a brutal campaign against the mutants. All of these things should be kind of familiar to X-Men fans, but everything's just a little different enough and brought together enough that it feels very fresh and unique. So we've had things like certain aspects of this story, but not all of it unified and happening together at once in such a coherent way. So Hickman is kind of bringing back a lot of Grant Morrison's energy from his time on the X-Men a couple of decades ago, both thematically and quite literally. The X-Men are forming their own path forward with its own language, politics, and identity, but there's also a lot of Days of Future Past in here, and Age of Apocalypse, and The World, and Krakatoa, and the Shi'ar, and the House of M. And I could go on and on with these little references and ideas being brought back into this new story here. There's all these flavors of these older things, but we've never seen these ideas brought together, and I think it was kind of needed. Hickman is sort of presenting a unified, comprehensive take on the X-Men, bringing everything together into this sort of massive collective history that really fits together. There's something truly unique going on here, and comparisons to Secret Wars, Rebirth, or even something like Crisis of Infinite Earths are going to come up short in that regard. Because those stories were arguably just as game-changing in and of themselves, but I don't think I've ever read any of those and come out of it feeling like everything is just so polished and well delivered. Take, for example, the future brotherhood that Bendis was floating a while ago. Remember that nightmare? In comparison, these new future characters and stories seem much better designed and much more intriguing. The plot as a whole is more interesting and engrossing than anything I've seen out of X-Men in some time. It's not going in the obvious, predictable directions I would have expected a story like this to go in. Whatever Moya and Charles did, whatever the full extent of their actions truly is, it seems to have changed the dynamics of the mutant race in some fundamental way, and its future is no longer clear. I can't quite put my finger on it. Every other time we've seen the future with the X-Men, there's something horribly wrong with it, though. When things are going well, it's usually some sort of illusion, the desperate fantasies of powerful characters like Legion or the Scarlet Witch. This feels different though. It's all real, very tangible, and it feels like it's here to stay. Which lets them warp to and from their headquarters all around the Earth at will is quite interesting. It implies this crazy new status quo for the X-Men. Right now, based on everything we've seen and heard, it's very much here to stay. And all this stuff is just sort of a new permanent fixture in the Marvel Universe for the foreseeable future. I had an incredible feeling this first time I read The Powers of X #1. I could feel the floor give out from under me, my gut dropped, and I saw the future of the X-Men comics lining up. And this chill just ran up my spine. These comics are not overhyped by Hickman and everyone else who said they would be changing the X-Men forever. They're going to. They were not exaggerating. Given that we're in 2019, I can confidently state these are the most important X-Men comics you'll see come out of this entire decade. This is a glowing review, I recognize it. I'm gushing over this thing and I can hardly cover it with any real criticisms from what I've read, but what can I say? I've read these first 4 House and Powers of X comics that are out as of recording, and both series are firing on all cylinders and have me hooked, just in this major big way. I'm on board. I have no idea where things are going from here, so as long as this all doesn't turn out to be some weird opium fantasy Charles is having in some den in the middle of Israel, these comics are going to change the X-Men forever, and even if they deliver a tenth of what is being suggested here, it's going to be amazing. It's going to seem like night and day compared to what we've gotten out of the X-Men ever since Decimation. And I've been waiting so long for the X-Men to finally and meaningfully move forward, I didn't know if we were ever actually going to get there. And now here it is, and I can hardly believe it. So let me know what you think of House of X and Powers of X in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you agree with my extremely strong opinions of it so far. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.